and welcome to the radiotimes.com Doctor Who podcast, which we should really give a proper name. My name's Hugh Fullerton.
My name's Morgan Jeffrey.
And this week, we're talking about what's in a name. A rose by any other name would smell so sweet. But in this case, we're talking about the name of someone specific, the name of someone pretty crucial to Doctor Who, the name of the Doctor. Yeah, it's also the anniversary this week of The Name of the Doctor, which was an episode all about the mystery of the Doctor's name. But rather than looking back at the episode specifically, we thought that was a pretty good springboard to chat about the biggest mystery of Doctor Who, the titular mystery of Doctor Who, which is Doctor Who?
Why doesn't it have a question mark? It really should.
Yeah, I mean, do you remember there was that period during Stephen Moffat's time where everyone was just saying, Doctor Who?
Yeah.
Like there's that. I always love the intonation of the woman who's got a Dalek stalk in her forehead. Do you remember in Asylum of the Daleks? She always says, Doctor Who? She always just says it like that, and it always makes me laugh.
They like to work it in every once in a while, don't they? Someone saying, "What do you mean, Doctor Who?"
Roll credits.
Cue a collective groan from viewers at home.
But yeah, no, it is funny because it's one of those things that I think there's a lot of mysteries in Doctor Who that are kind of one series mysteries or one Doctor mysteries. But this is kind of an enduring one because, you know, what is the Doctor's real name? I mean, is it the Doctor? Is it Doctor Who? Is it secretly Theta Sigma? Is it secretly something we can't pronounce or a weird mathematical expression? Or does it constantly change? There's been loads of theories over the years. In one of the recent Doctor Who lockdown watch-alongs of the Zygon Inversion, Peter Harness said he really does hope the Doctor's name is Basil Disco, which was the thing he put forward in that episode. But yeah, there's a few options, right? You pick one. You pick one.
Well, I think the one option that we can pretty much definitively rule out as being the Doctor's real name, ironically, is the Doctor.
True.
That's because in The Name of the Doctor, the episode, the Doctor tells Clara that he had chosen the name of the Doctor. It's a promise that he makes to never be cruel or cowardly, the old Terrance Dicks edict. And famously, he then gives up that title when he became, or he gave it up, or he does give it up when he became the War Doctor, because he's the one who broke the promise.
Yeah, and it's a fun thing as well because he chose the name of the Doctor as a promise and to like heal people and be nice, but also the word Doctor comes from him. Is something River Song suggests in A Good Man Goes to War. So there's a bit of a paradox there.
Circular logic.
It's very Doctor Who. Although we did have a fun thing where a few years ago someone dug out an old forum post Stephen Moffat did in the 1990s, I think, where he sort of posted that idea that actually maybe we get the word Doctor from the Doctor. It's come through time. We actually rang him up to check that was true, and that is true. He wrote it. He wrote it as a fan theory essentially in the 90s, and then eventually, you know, he waited long enough to actually make it canon. So there's a dream for all of us there. That's
what you can do when you're showrunner. You just make your own ludicrous fan theories canon. But also this idea that the Doctor chose the name the Doctor, it raises other interesting questions, like at what point did the characters start calling themselves the Doctor? Because Jo Martin's fugitive Doctor, as we saw, calls herself the Doctor, and she predates, we're pretty sure, William Hartnell, but she refers to herself as the Doctor, which suggests that the young child who grew up on Gallifrey, grew up to be William Hartnell's Doctor, also called himself the Doctor. Separately. But then there's a slight wrinkle there in that the Master, who grew up alongside young William Hartnell, in The Sound of Drums, that episode, he again says the Doctor chose his own name. I think he says, the man who makes people better.
How sanctimonious is that?
How sanctimonious is that? So you could take that to mean that the Master was about when the Doctor chose that name. And possibly then that he knows the Doctor's real name. But then that wouldn't make sense if that name predated the Doctor's childhood he shared with the Master. So
there's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on.
Twisting stuff. So, I mean, there's also a question, this is slightly blowing my mind, but I came into this podcast thinking of like, oh yeah, here's what people have said, here's what they've suggested the Doctor's real name is. But maybe even the Doctor doesn't know. The Doctor's secret name that, you know, River Song's whispering at things to get into stuff, you know, the thing that people can't pronounce. Maybe it was different when the Doctor, you know, came from this other universe. There's a whole new layer to all this.
I had the exact same thought. So yeah, no, I had the exact same thought, because the Timeless Children in series 12, that reveals that there are still huge chunks of the Doctor's past, right, that are missing from her memory. So the Doctor might not even know her real name, and she might think she knows a name that's not the Doctor, like a Gallifreyan name, and that's the secret she thinks she's hiding. But even that might not be her real name, given all this newfound mystery surrounding her origins. So there could be the name, the Doctor, then what the Doctor thinks her name is, and then what her name actually is. There's layers to this.
The name of the Doctor is secretly Brendan, as we all know. It's going back to pre-Timeless Children Doctor Who. There have been a few attempts over the years to kind of possibly suggest what the Doctor's name is. It's one of those things where everyone kind of loves the mystery, so it's not actually been attempted that often to suggest what the name is. But in the Armageddon Factor, there is possibly an attempt by Anthony Reid, who wrote the episode, where someone calls the Doctor, I think I'm pronouncing this right, Theta Sigma. Like, it's not clear if that was intentionally like, here's the big thing, but it was sort of a throwaway line, almost as like a gag of like, oh yeah, his name's Brian.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
or Basil, or... Yeah,
exactly. And then, you know, they later on in the series, they've been like, that was a nickname. That was his sort of like, you know, hey, Gibbo kind of university nickname. But then, as Paul Kirkley, who wrote a piece for us on Radio Times talking about this, suggested, maybe there's a clue there somewhere. You know, maybe the Doctor's name is mathematical, because nicknames usually, you know, sometimes it could be based on, you know, the Doctor's hilarious algebra joke, but, you know, maybe there is some, you know, little bit of Greek lettering hidden in there, and that's, you know, it's like a shortened version or something like that.
I also find it interesting that, throwaway though it may have been, that moment in the Armageddon Factor may well have been intended to serve as an actual reveal of the Doctor's real name. And then later on in the 1980s, when it's established to being a nickname, that's maybe one of the first ever Doctor Who retcons, right? Where intentional retcons, at least, yeah, where it directly addresses something from the past and goes, no, it wasn't that, it was this, as opposed to overruling it with some new plot twist or development.
Yeah. A few years later, after that, I think it was a few years later, there's another suggestion, which I can't pronounce, but Terence Dix and Malcolm Hulke. Terence Dix, obviously, was script supervisor, and Malcolm Hulke was one of the regular writers. They released a sort of annual thing, The Making of Doctor Who in 1972, where they kind of casually, in a footnote, were just like, oh yeah, the Doctor's name is this mathematical expression. Which is again just a jumble of, you know, letters and things, which I haven't written down here because I couldn't tell you what it was anyway.
You couldn't pronounce it even if you could write it down. So
maybe I'll put it in the description, right? And then you can all have a look. So I've written in my notes here, could be that.
Could be a load of old nonsense. Could be gibberish.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that has come up a few times. Though the Sixth Doctor said that Perry wouldn't be able to pronounce his name anyway. We have seen, it's been suggested that River Song pronounced it, but she was a sort of weird data ghost. So, you know, and then Peter Capaldi has sort of said that that's kind of what he thinks. There's a thing where there was a launch for, I can't remember what it was, I think it was for the series finale or an early episode of Peter Capaldi's last series. And basically there was a kid in the audience who said, what's the Doctor's name? Have you made up a name for the Doctor? And basically, Peter Capaldi said, I think he does have a real name. I think the Doctor, like everything about him, is a thing he's come up with to make himself understood by human beings. I don't think human beings could even really say his name, but I think we might be able to hear it at a certain frequency. If the stars are in the right place and your heart's in the right place, you'll hear it. I've written here, he concluded to loud applause.
Everyone applauded. It was a lovely moment.
Yeah. So that's kind of a fun idea. And then, obviously, you know, fans may recognise that actually did make its way into Doctor Who canon.
Stephen Moffat thought, I'll have a bit of that.
Yeah, he basically wrote it in to the episode in Peter Capaldi's big final speech. One of the last things the Doctor says, he basically says, it's slightly changed. Says children can understand it if their heart's in the right place and stuff. Actually, there was a bit of a clue of this personal anecdote here where when I think you and I went on set for Peter Capaldi's last episode, Twice Upon a Time, they had this board at Roath Lock where they had some cuttings and images from press events. And one of the things they had was an article I'd written from that launch, which just had Peter Capaldi had an idea about the Doctor's real name, it's so inspiring, or something like that. And basically they had it just there, which was quite disconcerting at the time. And I was like, why have they pulled that specifically? With hindsight, clearly, like they had already decided to like include it in some way, and they'd been like, it's nice that other people have picked up on that moment as well.
Your article was like part of their mood board.
Exactly, that's exactly
series.
it. So maybe if they're listening to this, any ideas, any ideas you want to pick up on for the Timeless Children 2? This time it's even more timeless. It's slightly off tangent there, but yeah, no, I think I kind of like the idea that it's an alien race. I mean, we have heard that a lot of Time Lords' names are pronounceable. They're like Rassilon and things like that. But, it's like, and like Susan.
yeah, that's a good point. If you've got Rassilon and Omega and, Susan, although in fairness, we don't know that was actually her Gallifreyan birth name. And I think spin-off novels and comic strips have established alternative names for Susan. But why would the Doctor have a name that's a mathematical equation when it's pretty firmly established that most of them have fairly pronounceable English-sounding names?
I mean, are we sure that those are their like main names, or do they all have a secret name?
Maybe the Doctor just had a really lame nickname in Theta Sigma, whereas like the guy who formed Time Lord Society, he gets Omega because that's cool sounding. Cool. He earned a cool sounding nickname.
That's true. Maybe that's it. And then so the Doctor was like one of those kids who's like, oh yeah, I don't know if you met me. Everyone calls me Spud.
He was the Mr. Pink of Time Lord Society. So I don't want to be Theta Sigma. Come on, guys.
But yeah, that's it. There's a few theories. To be honest, looking at this, I was thought, oh yeah, there's loads of times they've brought it up, and it's often a joke's made out of it, like in the Zygon invasion. But I do feel like it's surprising how little it has come up in a weird sort of way.
No, I was thinking that when you were talking about it being one of the few mysteries that's carried on throughout the whole 50 plus years of the show, and that's true, but it hasn't actually come up that often in that time. It's touched upon here and there, rarely as a major plot point. I think the name of the Doctor, that episode, is really the only story ever that's been dedicated specifically to that point of what is the Doctor's name. Otherwise, it's just people asking here and there, and they kind of get used to the idea pretty quickly that he doesn't have a name. There are obviously exceptions, like when he was exiled to Earth for a long period, he went by the name John Smith, which was an alias he had used before and actually used since. So every so often the Doctor has to adopt a human-sounding name to blend in. But for the most part, it doesn't really come up, the fact that he doesn't have a quote-unquote real name.
No. And then regularly the point the series makes is that the Doctor's name is the Doctor or Doctor Who, in terms of like, I feel like there was, in the time of the Doctor, isn't the thing that Clara would have to say his real name into the crack in the wall to get the Time Lords to help or something, and in the end she says, oh, it doesn't matter, all you need to know is Doctor Who. Roll credits. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something like that.
I think all the evidence, or like the vast majority of evidence is pointing to, is that the Doctor's name is Doctor Who. I think we're not seeing the wood for the trees here. It's like with Super Ted, where he would always say, I'm going to say my secret magic word, and then he would seem to whisper something, but you never heard what he whispered, and then he became Super Ted. And I always thought that his secret magic word was secret magic word. And it was, it was hiding in plain sight. And I think similarly, from Super Ted to Doctor Who, I think similarly, the Doctor's name is Doctor Who. It's been there all along. We just don't want to see it.
Well, there's a thing, isn't there, in World Enough and Time, where Missy, played by Michelle Gomez, kind of cuts in saying his name is Doctor Who. He chose it himself, trying to sound mysterious, and he dropped the Who when he realised it was a tiny bit on the nose.
And that's not all that outrageous, given that the Doctor later wore question marks on his lapels and carried a question mark umbrella.
Yeah, and had a car with Who won. That's a bit of a clue, isn't it?
He seems like the kind of person that would call himself Doctor Who, doesn't he? And think it was cool.
There's also, I mean, that is another question which we were going to talk about in this episode, which is the character ignoring the secret name? Is it the Doctor or Doctor Who? I mean, we would always say the Doctor, but I mean, there's an argument that for fans, it's like, oh yeah, obviously it's proper to call him or her the Doctor. But within the series, in 1966, in the War Machines, the supercomputer Wotan declares, Doctor Who is required, bring him here.
Doctor Who is required.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where the main character being called the Doctor doesn't mean that they couldn't also be called Doctor Who. If that makes sense. So like, no, it doesn't. It's not like an either or thing, because it could be that the Doctor is called Doctor Who and then goes by the Doctor, as in like Dr. Smith. Oh yes, the Doctor over there.
My theory and my headcanon on that War Machines thing, which is just a mistake, is that Wotan refers to someone whose name isn't in their records as who. So it's like Doctor question mark. And
Right. So
that's why.
You've thought about this. I'm impressed.
I've thought about this way too. Of course, I have. I'm a Doctor Who fan. Of course, I've thought about this way too much. But if that were the only example, that would be fine. But there are, of course, other examples where it's at least implied that the Doctor's name actually is Doctor Who.
I think Who Won is on Bessie the car is just too much.
Yeah.
Like that always makes me laugh. I mean, to be honest, even within the show itself, there's a bit of a disagreement. Like the character was the Doctor in some scripts, and then it switched to being Doctor Who. Then it switched back around the time of Peter Davison, I think, to being definitively the Doctor. But then when it came back with Christopher Eccleston, he was Doctor Who, and then David Tennant, when he came in, insisted that it changed to the Doctor. So in his first episode, I know.
What a nerd.
But then Peter Capaldi liked saying Doctor Who. Like he always said, "Oh, I love playing Doctor Who."
I think it's quite fun. I think it takes a little bit of the joy out of it to credit the character as the Doctor. I know it's not the character's actual name, at least within the fiction of the show, but I think it's fun. It's kind of like Santa Claus, Doctor Who. It's kind of like, it's what people know the character as, right? So I think it's kind of fun to credit the character in that way. It's most people outside of hardcore fandom don't call the character the Doctor. They say, oh, they've cast a new Doctor Who. So I think it's quite fun to keep that going.
So Patrick Mulkern, Radio Times regular, asked Stephen Moffat this around the time of the Missy episode, and he basically gave very strong arguments on every side at once. He said, "I'm firmly of the belief his real name is unknown, and he goes by the title Doctor. I believe that was the original intent of Doctor Who's creators, and the Doctor Who was never intended as anything other than the title and the premise of the show. It's a question, nothing more. They just left off the question mark, that's all. I don't know why. Maybe they ran out of lecture set, or an interesting cat walked past. Doesn't matter. That is what I believe. I hope it's what you believe, and that's forever that. Except, of course, I'm wrong." And because his name is Doctor Who. He was called Doctor Who on screen in the proper BBC show. It's mentioned twice in the War Machines. Doctor Who, he said that's on screen, that's his name. Patrick Troughton, Doctor, calls himself Dr. von Ware, German for Doctor Who. And he mentions Bessie as well. He said, continuity is continuity. You just can't ignore the bits you don't like. And then he said, so he's definitely Doctor Who, except I believe he definitely isn't. He basically, I think this is the thing we've talked about before with canon and stuff, where it's actually quite a good example where we can get a bit caught up on what is definitively stated on screen and what is a rule, because like fans don't like the character being called Doctor Who, so would ignore like a little bit of an inconsistency in early 1960s episode. But you know, fans do like the idea that William Hartnell's the first Doctor, so that is very, very important. And that's, like, I'm not saying that's wrong to think that. I'm just saying that like we do always pick and choose.
No, and Stephen Moffat was absolutely right. I think he was, being sarcastic there when he said you can't just ignore the bits of canon that you don't like, because of course that's what fans do, whether it be the Doctor being half human in the TV movie or these latest twists in The Timeless Children. Fans do ignore the bits they don't like, and you know what? That's fine. You can, and then you because continuity doesn't really play a huge role in Doctor Who stories, really, as they unfold. As we say, it really just boils down to a traveller in time and space who fights monsters and so on and so on. So you can just ignore the bits you don't like because they don't really impact the storytelling for the most part. But no, I think it's interesting. I think it's fun.
I think so too. I mean, I do kind of love the idea that at that sort of climactic moment in The Name of the Doctor, when they're like, oh no, we need to say the Doctor's name to get in here, and River Song secretly whispers it, she actually just went, Doctor Who! Like, I mean, there's an argument as well, like, you and I, if I chose to change my name, that would be my name. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, if I decide my name was Harry, and I don't think I even need to legally change it. I think in the UK, at least, you can just decide what is your new name, even if it isn't official on your birth certificate. That is what you can be addressed as. So it is the name of the Doctor is the name of Doctor Who, because that's what they want to be called. Yeah, I guess. Do you know what I mean?
There's a moral level to this as well, in that if the Doctor wants to be called the Doctor, we should refer to them as the Doctor. That's
true. I think that's fair. All incarnations. Maybe they switch. Maybe the 12th Doctor really liked being Doctor Who, and the 13th Doctor prefers the Doctor again. That is actually, on a related note, that is actually a theory. I wrote down a couple of Reddit theories. There was someone who worked out the Doctor's name, or thought they did, by trying to expand that mathematical expression I mentioned earlier. God knows what they made out of that. The other thing I quite liked was someone suggested that the Doctor has a different name with each incarnation. So every time he gets a new face or she gets a new face, they also get a different secret name, which I'm not quite sure I understand what that means. But I think the idea was that if the Doctor, is capable of picking faces or subconsciously picking faces you've seen before, as with the case of the 12th Doctor, then, maybe there's a name attached to that face secretly as well.
So the Doctor picks a new name to go with every face, but just doesn't bother telling anyone what.
Yeah, and it's really important.
It's really important. It's really super important. But you know what? It's easier for you if I just call me the Doctor.
Yeah, it's like I'm actually Sharon now. But you know what? Let's just keep it simple. I don't have to change all my licenses.
Yeah, exactly. That's all purpose. It works across the board. It's fine. Let's just go with that. Yeah. That would actually make a lot of sense if, again, the Doctor is just the name that the Doctor allows other people to call him or her for whatever reason.
Yeah. God, that, you know what? I said that as a sort of silly joke, and now I'm actually like, you know what? Kind of makes sense.
kind of makes. I think if you talk about anything related to Doctor Who for too long, you start thinking that very, very silly ideas make a lot of sense.
I think
this is the thing. This is the thing as well, is that Doctor Who fans don't like the idea that he or she is called Doctor Who, because that's silly. As if no other part of this show is silly. It's all silly. It's all silly. I love it to bits, but it's incredibly silly.
I think that's regularly our conclusion on the unnamed radiotimes.com Doctor Who podcast. But I think it's a good conclusion anyway. We don't know what the Doctor's name is. Could be the Doctor, could be Doctor Who, could be John Smith, could be Theta Sigma, could be, Sharon. The list is endless and will never ever be solved, because that'd be super boring and less fun, even if it was a bit more sensible. So yeah.
Something else that's not super boring is the Radio Times Doctor Who podcast.
That's true. That's really exciting. And every moment is a thrill ride of discussion about canon and the Timeless Children over and over again, which keeps coming up. I mean, to be fair, we talk about the impact that had. It keeps on cropping up in unrelated podcasts we do. So,
and we don't just keep bringing it up to annoy people. Honestly, no.
It may seem that way.
It may seem that way. There's just a lot to unpick there.
There is. We're still dealing with it. We may have a very long time before there's a new series, so we'll still have plenty of time to dissect that. And in the meantime, while we do that, I'm going to sort of casually wind up this week's podcast in a very subtle way like that, and say, as usual, thank you for listening. And we obviously have loads of great Doctor Who content on radiotimes.com. We're currently running a vote for the best ever Doctor Who modern series, which is currently in the final between Series 1 with Christopher Eccleston and Series 4 with David Tennant. Currently, Series 4 is running away with it at time of recording. So if you are a big Christopher Eccleston fan who wants the 2005 series honoured, please go and vote. And if you would rather read other stuff about Doctor Who, there's loads. We write loads about Doctor Who all the time, you may have noticed. So please go and read some of that. In the meantime, I've been Hugh Fullerton.
I've been Morgan Jeffrey. Those are our names.
Yes. Our secret names, we won't tell you, because that would open a rift in time and space. And this podcast, which also does not have a name, is concluded. So thanks again for listening, and goodbye.